Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, today we're unraveling a true crime story that honestly feels like it was ripped right out of a Hollywood blockbuster thriller, but it is 100% real. We're heading back to the dark, early hours of August 1963 to look at a meticulously planned operation. Basically, a gang managed to hijack a moving locomotive and steal an absolute fortune from the Royal Mail, and they did it all without firing a single gunshot. It's legendary, and today we're breaking down exactly how they pulled it off, and, well, how they ultimately got caught. All right, let's dive right in. To really grasp why an ordinary gang would attempt something so incredibly brazen, we've got to look at the price. I mean, they stole roughly 2.5 million pounds back in 1963. But if you adjust that for inflation, that's the equivalent of a staggering 67 million pounds today. To put that into perspective, that's roughly 800 crore rupees. With stakes that mind-bogglingly high, you can kind of see why the criminal underworld was willing to risk total ruin for it. So, our story kicks off with a massive mystery. Just picture this. It's 3 a.m. on August 8th, pitch black outside, on this lonely stretch of track called Sears Crossing. You've got 58-year-old train driver Jack Mills hurtling through the darkness when suddenly a red signal flashes ahead. Now, for this specific Royal Mail train at this specific location, a red light made absolutely zero logical sense. But, following protocol, he hits the brakes. So why did a massive locomotive carrying a 2.5-ton fortune grind to a halt? Well, to answer that, we've got to rewind a bit. Let's take a look at Section 1, Conspiracy in the Dark. The mastermind behind this whole audacious plot was a guy named Bruce Reynolds. Now, he and his London-based crew were pretty well-known criminals, but they had one major problem. They knew literally next to nothing about trains. So they did what any smart management team does, right? They outsourced. They partnered up with another infamous gang known as the South Coast Raiders, because these guys actually had experience in this very specific niche field. Over a few months, the team grew to over 15 people, pooling all their expertise for one massive nonviolent strike. Moving right along to our next section, Royal Mail's secret tip. The sheer scale of this whole opportunity hinged on a mysterious senior security officer working deep inside the Royal Mail, who was leaking vital intelligence to Reynolds. This informant revealed that while the high-value package, or HVP carriage, normally carried about £300,000, the load on the post-bank holiday weekend was going to be astronomically higher. We're talking ballooning to nearly £3 million. So this specific date, it was essentially the ultimate jackpot. And more critically, this date provided a massive tactical advantage. You see, in the years prior, the post office had started outfitting these HVP carriages with security alarms. But, and get this, on this exact day, the alarmed carriages were completely out of service. So the Royal Mail was forced to use an older reserve carriage, number M3024M, which had zero security alarms. And to make matters even sweeter for the robbers, railway staff positioned it as the second carriage right behind the engine. The target was just perfectly isolated. The stage is set. Let's jump into the next section, the perfect 15-minute heist. The sheer speed of this operation is just astonishing. Think about this. At 6:50 p.m. on August 7th, the train departed Glasgow Central, totally oblivious to the ambush waiting down the line. At 3 a.m., the trap at Sears Crossing was sprung, and by 4:30 a.m., the gang was already safely tucked away at their hideout. The speed and the sheer precision of this timeline is honestly remarkable. So how exactly did they force that stop at Sears Crossing? Well, it was incredibly low-tech but highly effective. A gang member literally just covered the green track signal with a glove and then used a standard battery to power the red light. Simple, right? The second the train stopped, they instantly cut the trackside phone lines to isolate the crew. Now, tragically, when driver Jack Mills resisted, he was struck over the head with an iron rod and knocked out. Meanwhile, the rest of the gang uncoupled the engine and that vulnerable HVP carriage from the rest of the massive 12-carriage train. Okay, here is a crucial point. They needed to move this newly isolated cash carriage to their waiting trucks at Bridgo Bridge, which was about a kilometer away. They'd actually brought a retired train driver with them for this exact purpose. But there was a massive hiccup. The retired driver took one look at the modern engine controls and completely panicked. He couldn't drive the thing. So the gang was forced to revive the bleeding, injured Jack Mills and make him drive the train that final, grueling kilometer. Once they got positioned at Bridgo Bridge, this gang operated like a perfectly oiled machine. They had exactly 15 minutes. They stormed the HVP carriage, tied up the staff, and quickly formed a human chain right down the embankment. Inside that carriage were 128 heavy sacks, just stuffed with 1 pound, 5 pound, and 10 shilling notes. And in just a quarter of an hour, they managed to load 120 of those sacks, weighing nearly 2.5 tons, by the way, into their waiting truck. They only left 8 behind simply because they ran out of time. A flawless execution. But that brings us to our next section, the 30-minute heavy mistake. As the gang prepared to vanish into the night, one robber made a really fateful decision. He turned to the bound railway staff and delivered this chilling threat. He said, "Don't try to get up for 30 minutes or you'll lose your life." I mean, it sounds like a menacing line straight out of a movie, right? Meant to ensure their escape. But ironically, actually, scratch that, tragically for them, this specific, off-the-cuff threat would become the fatal flaw that brought their entire empire crumbling down. Because the police brilliantly used that exact threat against them. When investigators heard that the robber specifically demanded a 30-minute head start, they just did the math. They calculated exactly how far a heavy truck could travel on rural roads in half an hour, establishing a precise 50-kilometer search radius. And guess what? The gang's hideout, Leatherslade Farm in the village of Oakley, was exactly 43 kilometers away. Without even realizing it, they had told the police exactly where to look. Meanwhile, back at the farm, the gang was listening to police VHF radios and realized the net was closing in fast. Cue the panic. They bumped their departure up from Sunday to Friday, hastily splitting up the massive haul, giving each core member the modern equivalent of almost 4 billion rupees. Desperate to cover their tracks, they wiped down the farm and paid a helper a hefty sum to burn the entire property to the ground. But the helper just took the bribe and bolted, leaving the hideout completely intact. Let's explore our final section, Secrets Revealed by Monopoly. So, a suspicious neighbor noticed all this flurry of activity at the farm and tipped off the authorities. When the police finally raided Leatherslade Farm, they hit the evidentiary jackpot. I mean, they found the property exactly as the gang had left it. They discovered empty Royal Mail sacks, an Austin truck that had been hastily painted yellow to avoid detection, and sitting right there in the middle of the living room, a Monopoly board. And this is where it gets crazy. In a display of sheer arrogance, on the actual night of the heist, while celebrating their success and waiting for the heat to die down, they actually sat around playing Monopoly using their real stolen cash. It's wild. But here's the kicker. While they had been super careful to wipe down most of the surfaces in the house before fleeing, they completely forgot to wipe down the game pieces and the board itself. So they left a treasure trove of perfect fingerprints all over a board game. Scotland Yard took those fingerprints and very quickly matched them up to existing criminal records. Within days, the dragnet closed in. Out of the 16 men involved, 14 were arrested. And the courts? They wanted to make a severe example out of them for this quote-unquote crime of the century, handing down massive 30-year prison sentences. But the real tragedy here is driver Jack Mills. The man who suffered that blow to the head never fully recovered, could never work again, and sadly passed away 7 years later. Yet even with this massive police success, 2 glaring loose ends still remain today. Out of the entire network, 2 men simply vanished like ghosts. You've got the panicked replacement driver whose real name was never even known to the core gang, and that mysterious Royal Mail senior security officer who supplied all the insider tips in the first place. To this day, neither of their identities has ever been discovered. They quite literally walked away clean. Which brings us to the end of our explainer today. And it leaves us with a really fascinating question. Can meticulous planning ever truly account for human error? Think about it. This gang engineered the heist of a lifetime. They accounted for train schedules, carriage payload, non-violent hijacking tactics, the whole shebang. Yet they were ultimately undone by simple human hubris, a careless 30-minute threat, a lazy arsonist, and an arrogant game of Monopoly. So what do you think is the biggest takeaway from this historic heist? Keep questioning the details, and I'll catch you on the next explainer.